To the cloud. All right, we are live. We are recording. Morgan, I'm gonna put the spotlight on you.
Okay.
And we are ready to go.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me, and thank you, Temple Great Gates of Prayer, for having me this Sunday evening. We are going to make some French onion soup, one of my favorite recipes to make. I love cooking, so much so that I actually created a food blog and an Instagram food account. It is called Namaste, like nom nom, like eating namaste.hungry or namaste hungry. So that's where I put all of my creations, my concoctions of food, gluten-free, healthy, non-healthy, super gluten-filled, vegetable-based, meat-based, anything that you can imagine is up there. I have over 80 recipes on the website, and it's updated 3 times a week. So that's where you'll find this recipe as well as a couple others. I know that this is soup month, so like I said, we're going to be making some French onion soup, which is actually not as hard as you might think. So what I actually have here is a Dutch oven, or you can just use a deep pot or a stock pot. I have some butter. I have 5 tablespoons of butter in here. Yes, there's a lot of butter because we want to render down the onions and caramelize them. I have 2 large onions sliced through half, so they're smaller pieces, not in full circles. And I have that in the Dutch oven right now, and they're going to sit on a medium flame for about 20 minutes. So there's a lot of time for questions and conversations about it. And if you want to, I guess, Dina, if you want to facilitate any questions or anything that you have, I can also kind of schmooze, although I tend to go off on strange tangents, which make 0 sense. So any questions is awesome as well. But for now, we have the onions in the oven, in
so
the butter.
So far, I haven't seen any questions in the chat.
Okay.
Hello, Morgan?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Ellen's mom.
Hi.
And you. Can we see what's in your pot? Do you have a laptop? So they're really giant pieces of onion.
Yeah, so you want to, I mean, you can cut them however thick you'd like. There's no real right or wrong way to slice them. I tend to go, I guess they're about a quarter of an inch or maybe even a half an inch thick. You can go thinner, you can go wider, but in between is where I tend to fall because that's kind of, the onions tend to render down a little bit quicker. The thicker they are, the harder they render down.
Thanks.
Sure.
So we have a question. Jesse would like to know what type of onions are best to use.
Great question. So I use just yellow onions. I've actually never experimented with white or Spanish onions. You might be able to do shallots. That might be an interesting flavor to use. I know shallots caramelize really well, but I tend to just use standard yellow onions. I do choose organic. There are certain foods that I do prefer to buy organic, and that's predominantly produce. So my produce is usually organic, but it does, I mean, vegetables and fruit are healthy for you regardless. So yeah, I usually just use yellow onion.
I have a question.
Sure.
So the ingredients are so simple. It's just the broth and the onions and no salt and pepper. You don't do any seasoning on any of this.
So you could do a little bit of salt. I do have a small ramekin of salt that I'll add to it. The salt does help break down the molecules within the onion. It actually not even connected to onion soup, but if you're mashing a banana and the banana is not fully ripe, you can add a pinch of salt and that'll help render it down as you're mashing the banana. So salt does act as like a scientific additive to recipes to help break down food. So I can add a pinch of salt. I will season the broth with a little bit of salt and pepper. I tend to not cook with a lot of salt and pepper just because I find a lot of things salty to begin with. So I'll use a low sodium or no sodium stock or broth. The broth that I actually have is from Trader Joe's and it's organic vegetable broth. So I have 2 of these and the sodium content is 270. So to me, I think that's enough, but I might add a pinch or two. Usually salt is to taste, which to taste is really just you taste it. And if you want to add a little bit more, you can. I don't tend to measure out my salt or pepper, but if that's something that you want, you can absolutely add that.
All right. Well, we're very careful on our salt. So even when I saw the 240, I'm using the same exact broth as you.
Oh, great.
Instead of using full, like a full, what is it, 48 ounces
Yep.
of the broth, I'm going to use less broth and a little water just so it won't be as salty, because I think 240 will think it's pretty salty.
Yeah, that's a great idea. If the best thing you can do, and I'm learning this as I go also, is to not use full stock and just substitute or supplement with a little bit of water. So I did that with my chicken noodle soup too. I added just 1 pint of broth and then I added 2 cups of water.
Excellent.
Great question. So I'll show you what my onions look like now. They're a little bit better. They're a little bit more golden. Essentially want them to get pretty brown, pretty golden. We'll add a little bit of the flour just to make the sauce soup a little thicker. Adding flour to any soups or stocks or purees makes it a little bit thicker. What I actually am going to use, and I didn't have this in the recipe just because I used flour at the time, but I have arrowroot. The arrowroot is a paleo, quote unquote, paleo friendly substitute for flour. It acts as a thickening agent. So I always have this on hand. I usually make like a turkey gravy with it, or I'll add it to a recipe that I made today was rigatoni and broccoli. So I'll add a little bit of that to it to thicken up the sauce.
How long do you saute?
The onions?
Yeah.
So it essentially should be around 30 minutes, but you can add, I guess, speed it up a little bit with a little bit more heat. So you could put it, instead my heat is on medium low now just because it's pretty hot in there. So we're gonna let that do its thing for a little while, but it will sit for about 30, 35, maybe 40 minutes because it will sit with the stock itself for about 20. But I'm just gonna do it for about 10 minutes today. I like the onions to really marry with the flavor of the stock so that it has all a well-rounded flavor.
Now, if you didn't want to use butter or margarine, which oil would you suggest people use?
That's a great question. I am a firm believer. Oh, I'm too short. I can't reach. Yeah. Okay. So this is one of, I don't know if you could see it. Maybe you can in this angle. This is one of my favorite brands of oil. It's avocado oil from Chosen Foods. You can get this gigantic container at Costco. There's also, you can use olive oil as well. I don't prefer coconut oil. I just don't necessarily like the flavor. It's a little too coconutty for me. Even when I bake, I use avocado oil. Avocado oil is known to have a high heat. It's 500 degrees, which is kind of nice because olive oil tends to burn, and burnt oil usually leads to high levels of omega-6, and we want to stay away from omega-6s because that can cause the bad cholesterol to go up and a couple of other issues with our body. So we want to stay with good heat, good oil, and avocado oil tends to be the oil of choice for me. Good question. Thank you.
Is safflower also a high heat oil?
What's that?
Safflower oil.
I can't speak to safflower oil. I've never used it. I usually just stick to avocado or olive oil. But you can usually tell if if the oil is burning, if it starts to smell a little pungent. Like you could really, really smell if oil is burning and it splatters.
I was also, someone just typed to me saying that there is a coconut oil that is unflavored, just so you know.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, I for some reason, coconut oil, I have it. I've used it. I'll bake with it every now and again. But my oil is usually avocado oil. I like the creaminess of it. And I like that it comes in a gigantic jug like that. Okay. So we'll bring you guys in for what the onions look like now. They're getting a little bit more caramelized we do want a little bit more browning. So they'll probably sit here in the butter for about 5 more minutes. I'll add the flour and then I'll add the stock. In terms of the, hold on, dropping everything. In terms of the baguette, you can use any type of bread. You can use, if you can't find a French baguette tends to be just longer and a little bit thinner. You can just get semolina. You can do a gluten-free bread. I don't have any recommendations on gluten-free bread. I don't usually eat gluten-free bread, but if you find a bread that's loaf, I'm sure you can use that too. You can also use sourdough. Let the sourdough bread sit out for a day. Let it get crispy, because what you'll do is you'll put the soup in what's called like a ramekin or an oven-safe broiler bowl. Or I guess that's what that's called. I call it a ramekin, but you put the soup in here and you cut up the baguette and put the baguette within the soup itself. The soup tends to, the bread absorbs the soup. So the crispier and crunchier the bread, the better it is. So that way you don't have like weird soggy pieces of bread in your soup. Unless you like that, and that's fine. But I like a little bit of crunch. So what we'll turn on the broiler and we'll broil the soup at the end for melting the cheese. And I know the recipe says Gruyere. I actually have just mild cheddar here. You can use cheddar, you can use provolone, you can use Swiss, anything that melts really nicely. And shredded is probably better than sliced, just so it melts out a little bit evenly. Although I guess if you can only find sliced, you can cut it up into quarters and put it on the bread.
Can you use mozzarella cheese?
Oh yeah, mozzarella cheese can be just as good. All cheeses, except for cheese or gorgonzola. I'm not a fan of those cheeses, so I'll say no to those. But they don't melt as well either. So anything that has a little bit of, I guess, like the part skim or the whole milk types of cheeses, those are better for that because it'll melt. And if you're somebody who's dairy-free, Daya makes a really good shredded cheese. They make off the block, I think it's called, shreds that are mozzarella. I think they have cheddar, they have yellow cheddar, but that could be interesting to try if you are dairy-free. And if you are dairy-free doing this also, or if you know somebody who's dairy-free and you don't want to use the butter, Earth Balance makes a good plant-based butter. Miyokos, I think, makes some plant-based butter, and Foragers, I believe.
But not for every day.
Morgan, we do things dairy free. So like we said, we have the Earth Balance.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, and we're going to use some fake mozzarella style cheese alternative. And then I'm going to try on one for him, and then I'm going to try one with a Swiss and Gruyere. Is that how you say it?
Gruyere.
Yep, shredded combo. We'll see how.
Oh, is that the Trader Joe's brand?
It is.
That's my favorite.
Is it? Okay.
It's what I actually use that in my mac and cheeses also. I like playing around with different flavors of mac and cheese. So that's a really good blend of cheeses.
Excellent. So let me ask you a question. I mean, I think we're jumping ahead, but we're going to make a big batch of soup, and we're going to put cheese on it and melt the cheese. Can we save the rest of the soup and do more the next? Like, you don't have to do. Can we save the soup and do it again? Because at 8 o'clock at night, we're probably not eating soup anyway. You know.
Oh yeah, you can absolutely, yeah. You can make the whole soup and not even do the cheese and the bread and the broiling and the whole shebang. You can have this saved. You can put it in a container and put it in the fridge and throw it back in the pot, warm it up, and just rinse, repeat, and then do it the next day. We've had this soup cold and then reheated before, and it came out great.
Excellent.
Yeah, you can also actually do this in a Instant Pot. It has a soup and a saute function. So you saute the onions first, hit the off button on the Instant Pot, turn it into the soup function. There's like 85 different buttons. I'm still learning it. I use it twice and I have it. Sorry, Jessie, I know she got it for me. I love you. And she's on this call. I love you. I appreciate the gift. So you can add the soup to the Instant Pot and turn it on and let it do its thing and slow cook it there, or you throw it in a crock pot. So you turn the, but then you would have to do the onions separately and then put the onions in the crock pot with the soup and let it kind of cook.
Can you freeze the soup? I know you said you could put it in the refrigerator, but how, like, could you freeze it if you wanted to make it for like a week from now or so?
Oh, for sure.
Okay, so it's a good freezing soup.
It's a good freezing soup for sure. It's one of those that really is pretty versatile. I will say freezing the soup, you might have a little bit watered down version. So maybe just adding a little bit of salt or a little bit of pepper might do the trick, but I would say that this freezes pretty well.
Excellent. Also, Jessie sent a heart in her chat.
I know, I saw that. That was my housewarming gift from her. The Instant Pot is cool. I'm just like, I get nervous. I made chili in it twice and it started saying error. I'm like, oh, what did I do wrong? But it just burns quick, I guess. I don't know. I'm still learning. But I'm going to show you what the onions look like because they're starting to get to where I'd like them to be. They're pretty caramelized, which is great. I also really recommend a Dutch oven. You don't have to spend a crazy amount of money on a Dutch oven. The beauty of the Dutch oven is it's got a really heavy bottom and it's a dark bottom, and dark bottoms tend to brown and caramelize really well without sticking. This is super easy to make. This is super easy to clean rather. I got this Staub one on Sur La Table when it was on sale. You can make short ribs in it. I actually have a short rib recipe on my blog that uses the Dutch oven, and you can make it on the stovetop and throw it in the oven for it to braise. So it's a 2-in-1. I really like Dutch ovens. Okay, so I'm gonna add my tablespoon of flour. And again, this just kind of sets up the thickness of the soup. Actually, I don't know how safe this is, but I will just sprinkle it in. Get to see my messy stovetop. And it just blends in really well. Whoop. That's all you do with the flour. Let it sit for maybe a minute and two, and then you can add the stock. So I'm actually going to add the stock. I'm doing 1 small pinch of salt, the world's smallest pinch, and then I'm just going to add the stock. The soup actually was inspired when my husband Troy and I went to France in 2018, and the birth of my blog started then. We were at Citi Field, and I remember texting and talking to Troy, and I was like, I kind of think that I should just start a blog. He's like, okay. So then I said, well, I could start posting things and restaurants that I go to and recipes that I come up with. And so we came up with the name Namaste Hungry because I'm big into fitness and yoga, and I thought that was a fun play on words, as it should be. Like, it's fun to have a balance of healthy eating and non-healthy eating and exercise and fitness and health and things of that nature. So that's where the birth of this website came to be. And then shortly after, my Instagram account came, and not that I have 1 million followers, but I have pretty strong ones. So if you are on Instagram, I can type the information in the chat for everybody. And my blog is namastehungry.com. I could put that in the chat as well.
That will also be in the email that goes out tomorrow with the recipe and the video from today.
There are other soups on the website as well. I did just make a 7 veggie minestrone, which is really good. That freezes really well. I will say add an extra cup because sometimes we forget that pasta absorbs the stock. So that's why it took me 5 times to perfect my chicken noodle soup, because it was noodles with a side of soup, which I was okay with. But if you want soup, it's not just sucking down noodles. But anyway, so we added the stock. It's a lot of soup, which is great because we'll have it for the week. I'm going to turn the heat up to medium just so it starts to boil a little bit. You will see the separation of the oil and the stock. That's totally fine and normal. So you'll stir it. I like the color of this. Sometimes French onion soup's a little bit darker. You can also use A kosher beef broth if you want for this as well. Adds a little bit of a darker flavor and a different texture. But this will sit for about 10 minutes. And then we're going to ladle one, cut up the bread and add some cheese and have some soup. How's everybody doing if you're cooking? Good so far? Excellent. I see a thumbs up. Okay, I see 2 thumbs up. That's perfect. Okay, so we're gonna slice the bread. This also too depends on how thick or thin you want the slices of bread to be.
Excuse me? So
Yep.
the only thing that would make that not gluten-free is the bread,
Yes.
right? And a little bit of the flour.
Yeah, but you can use the arrowroot, which is gluten-free.
Right. So
Yep.
other than the bread, everything else is gluten-free. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Morgan, will we be seeing Troy have some onion soup?
I don't think he'll be making a cameo appearance this evening.
Really? That's why I'm here. That's what I see him.
He's taking care of our child.
Oh, okay.
I'll
Take a shot. Hey, Ashley.
Okay. So we're just gonna cut. So fun tip, if you're in the kitchen and you cut yourself with knives, I always cut myself with a bread knife. Don't know why, bread knives and I are not friends. But if you curl your fingers under as you hold the knife, I could probably tilt the knife a little bit. So sometimes we hold the bread or anything like this, which is a no-go since you're tending to cut yourself and you don't want to go to a hospital, especially like right now or ever. So you move your fingers in like a claw and you put the hand down. That way the blade just touches the knuckles. So it's way easier to cut instead of cutting your finger. That's a fun tip. And then also holding a knife, you hold like this, you don't have much control of the knife. So if you put your thumb and your pointer finger over the tip, right where it touches the edge, and you wrap your hands around, you have more control. So if you cut, it's way easier to have control of the knife. So 2 quick tips from my kitchen. Any other questions? These are fun. Actually, now that I'm thinking of it, I think Rudy's makes a pretty good gluten-free bread, or Char, I think they're called. If somebody is making gluten-free. The beauty also of French bread is it's pretty thin enough to go in a ramekin just as is, but I'm gonna cut them in quarters anyway, just to add a little bit more. And really, the reason why we're having the onions sit in the stock itself is to just let the stock and the onions marry with the flavors. So you really could just start ladling and put in the broiler now, but we like to really let those onions do its thing with the stock so that you get those flavors. You get the aromas of the stock that you're using. So we're using vegetable stock. So I would imagine there's all sorts of vegetables in here. There's carrots, there's celery, there's tomatoes, there's leeks. So we want those onions to pick up on those flavors. And then also we want the vegetable stock or the soup itself to pick up on the onion flavor as well, because we did take time to render the onions down and caramelize them. So we spent that time doing it to really build the boldness of the onion. And what that happens too is it becomes a little sweet. So it's not super bitter or sharp, it becomes a sweeter flavor.
And just to chime in for a moment, for those who are wondering how to do a kosher, use a kosher beef broth, there are kosher beef bouillon cubes that you can get, or a beef, or that are parve, and you get parve beef broth from like one of the kosher supermarkets, and that will help you make this still dairy.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Okay, I think for time, I'm just.
Or you can use vegan cheese.
What's that?
Or you can use vegan cheese if you really want to use the beef broth.
Okay. That's a good option. I like that there's so many options. That's the beauty of cooking. When you know your base and you know different avenues you want to experiment with, you can go the different avenues. I am not a baker, and Troy can definitely tell you that. But what I'm stubborn when it comes to being in the kitchen as well. So I was adamant about perfecting a cookie recipe. And the first time I made them, they came out thin and crispy, which is fine. And then the second time they came out burnt thin and crispy because I let them in to stay in too long. And I won't look at anybody's recipes. I don't look at anybody else's because I like to say I created it and it's my recipe. So I finally decided, all right, let's just do it a third or fourth try. And I used all-purpose flour, and then I used a paleo flour from Bob's Red Mill. I love Bob's Red Mill flours. They're just super clean, really quality. They stand behind their products. So their paleo flour is tapioca, arrowroot, coconut, and almond. It's a blend. So I used that for one of the cookie recipe combinations, and it actually came out really good. So what I know then now is I have my base of my cookie recipe, which I used today for another type of cookie that I'm putting on the blog this week. So when you know, like for this soup, you know you have the onions caramelizing and you have the stock, you could throw in other vegetables, or you can render down other sorts of vegetables and make a vegetable soup, or you can make a minestrone like I did. So getting in the kitchen and getting creative is about having those base pieces and base components and then branching out from there.
Do you ever add the onion soup seasoning mix?
I have not.
I don't know if you can see it.
Yes, that's a good idea.
And actually, you can make a stocking with that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for sharing that.
So sometimes I just add for the flavor, just a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, there's certain things that you could find in the store that really enhance what you're doing in the kitchen, what you're cooking. Absolutely. I always like using minced garlic from Trader Joe's, like the one in the oil or the water. I guess it's oil. I like using that for days where I'm like, I don't feel like having my hands smell like cloves of garlic for days. I'd rather just use a scoop and a half of it. And it does very similar, the same trick. So thank you, Rebecca, for sharing that. So what I'm doing now is I am ladling some soup and the onions into a ramekin. You don't want to fill it up as much as I did. I'm actually going to take some stock out. You want to leave room because, like I said earlier, bread is going to absorb some of the stock. So I'm putting 3 pieces. I have my broiler on already. Sprinkle some. It's actually great if you get some in the stock itself. And in the broth itself. Get it all up on that bread. This is gonna be so good. And then you can put it on a tray, a baking sheet, or you can just put it right under the broiler. I'm gonna grab a baking sheet really quick. Just a simple baking sheet. Put this on it in the center, or if you're making 2, you just put them equally divided on the sheet. Put it under the broiler. The beauty about a broiler, it crisps really quick. The con of a broiler, it crisps really quick. So you want to really watch when you're using that broiler. It can go from nice and crisp to completely burnt and redo, or I need to now order dinner in like 2 seconds.
Could you add mushrooms to the soup? Like, so when you're sauteing, when you're caramelizing the onions, can you add mushrooms in at that point?
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can definitely add. I would let the onions probably start doing its thing a little first and then add the mushrooms, but that would be a really hearty umami style flavor that you would go for. That sounds pretty good. That sounds really good. And I'm not big on mushrooms, but okay, so we have this in the broiler. Move this aside. It's here so we can see the end result. Okay, so already a minute in, the cheese is starting to melt, and I'm nuts that I'm constantly cleaning while I cook. I don't know if anybody else is like me, but I need to have everything kind of organized and clean. Otherwise, I go bananas. Sundays are my big meal prep days. So if you see my board behind me, I have what we're eating throughout the week for dinner. I have what my son Rowan is going to eat. And I also have meal preps. So today was zucchini, sweet potato, cauliflower. I tested 2 recipes. I made buffalo chicken meatballs, which are also on my blog too. And I made Rowan some pancakes with just banana and egg. And they're not my recipe. It's somebody else's recipe, but they're really good and he loves them. So something different than the typical yogurt.
Instead of broiling, because I don't have the plate for the broiler, would you be able, like if I could put it in the microwave?
You could do the microwave. The microwave won't crisp the bread. So you could bake it and just put it up top.
Just toast the bread and put it later.
You can do that too. Yeah, if you just want the cheese to melt, you can do that also.
Okay.
If you don't have a broil function, or if you have a toaster oven.
You have the plates for it.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, try you try it out, or you just have really good French onion soup and just get crispy cheesy bread and dip it in and enjoy a bread with the onion soup.
Okay.
That works too. Good question.
So would you say you broil it for like 5 minutes at the most, or like what's the timing?
So I would say no more than maybe like 4 minutes is what I wrote down. I don't even think I put the time on my recipe, just because this is something that you really want to watch consistently. I have it on low broil, and I have, so it usually is around 3 to 4 minutes in broil, high broil, because my oven does have a high and low function. If it's on high, it's done within 2 minutes. So I would just keep watching it. Yeah. So mine is just about done. I'm going to turn off the soup. Now my stomach is rumbling. This off. So it's browned, crisp enough, and I'm on my computer to show everybody what it looks like. Whoop. There it is. French onion soup at home.
That looks amazing.
It's pretty good, I'm not gonna lie.
Well, does anyone have any questions? Any more questions for Morgan?
I actually do have a question. So funny enough, my husband and I have used vegetable stock for a couple recipes, or beef stock, and I always find that sometimes I get too much of a flavor of the seasoning that the stock is seasoned with, like carrots or celery. Do you recommend using an unseasoned stock? What are you using?
So I use just the vegetable broth. I usually use just a beef stock, which doesn't have as strong of a flavor as veggie stock. So, I mean, I would maybe look to caramelize the onions a little bit more, use less of the stock, and add 1 or 2 cups of water instead.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions? Anything else? Any comments? Anyone?
Well, my house smells delicious. I have an electric oven, which is a little tricky. I mean, it has a broil feature, but it's not like having the flame. So I think it has to broil a little bit longer than the 3 or 4 minutes, but I'm going to keep checking it. But it smells delicious in here.
Yeah, it smells very good. The caramelization of the onions makes it sweet, and then the vegetable stock gives it an earthy flavor. The bread is crispy. The cheese is, cheese is always good no matter what. So I'm gonna let this sit for a minute or 2 before I taste it, because I tend to always burn my mouth when I'm eating this soup, no matter what. You can always go way extra with cheese. I'm actually trying my best to limit the amount of cheese, so that's why it doesn't have as much cheese on here, but you can always add more if you wanted to. But yeah, this recipe is on my blog. As Dina said, namastehungry.com. You can find this recipe, other soups, other concoctions. I have desserts. I have meal prep ideas. I have kid-friendly ideas. I have up there desserts, and I usually bake gluten-free. I like the flavor of gluten-free flour. That's just the reason why, but I do have some non-gluten-free items on there as well.
Your in-laws would like to know if there will be any left over for lunch tomorrow.
Yes, actually, there will be a lot, so please come hungry.
Well, this was wonderful. Thank you so much. And we do look forward to having you back again, because I know you and I have discussed that. And we will let you know. I'll send you some dates and themes. I'm going to stop the Facebook Live and stop the recording.